he punched a handcuffed prisoner. And it's ironic that the sheriff's department has had 6 or 7 of those instances at the time have made my decision. Of those 7 individuals at the sheriff's department who did things to handcuff prisoners or to prisoners in a correctional facility, 6 of them were terminated. The number 7 one was given a long suspension, I believe about 30 days. He was demoted and his vehicle was taken from him. And shortly thereafter, he quit. So all 7 of the people inside the sheriff's department were not allowed to remain at work. They were actually, 1 or 2 of them were arrested off the floor of the jail for doing what they did. So I had that knowledge at the time that I made the decision. I also talked to a recognized use of force expert. I went through the matrix that the use of force experts use in testifying in court and in federal instances where the FBI is investigating officers for use of force, and got his opinion on it. And this was 3 weeks before I terminated the guy. I pulled the officer's training records. I looked at his test scores in the academy when he was going through training on what all he did. And then I got the major that was in charge of the actual academy training and asked her to review the training protocol and the self-defense system that this officer used. That punch that he threw into that officer, into that Sunday's stomach, was not something that was taught. However, a group of 2 or 3 police officers secretly behind my back as chief went to the DA's office and spoke to the district attorney and falsely claimed that they teach that punch in the academy. That is correct, the punch may be taught, but you can't use it on a handcuffed prisoner. We teach people every day to kick, to punch, to knee when it's necessary, to use your elbows, to use the palm of your hand, anything that can save you, to use your baton, to use your mace. The fact that you are taught to use a baton does not give you carte blanche treatment to strike a handcuffed prisoner with a baton. So I find the logic very, very difficult to understand that this man was put back to work, and the Civil Service Board in Lafayette appears to not have any concern about what they're doing, and I think there needs to be some type of outside review of what they're doing. You know, you can't put a person back to work and jeopardize the citizens of Lafayette. And one thing I'll end this portion of my commentary with is that when I was there as a chief, there was approximately about $10 million in potential liability claims. I say potential because they hadn't been litigated or, people hadn't had final decisions made, but this is $10 million worth of the citizens' money, taxpayers' money, that had the potential of being paid out because of something that a Lafayette officer was accused of doing. So I had to act, and last but not least, as a chief of police, every action that a police officer in Lafayette did had the potential to create liability for me. There's a term in the legal system called vicarious liability. It means that I'm responsible for those officers. And that is something that I took very seriously. And I looked at it and I did the right thing. Again, I don't know why the city attorney did not want me to testify as to why I fired the officer, in contrast to the chief who served before me. Even after I was the chief of police, any discipline that he gave, he was subpoenaed to come back after he retired to testify and to defend his position. I was not allowed to do that, and I think it may be a direct effort to try to make it look like I did something wrong, and I didn't. I fired a guy who committed a crime on camera, and all of the experts around this country and the case law proves it. So I'm very disturbed about it, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. It's going to take some powers higher than me to straighten out.
I can get a question into the chief.
Yes.
How you doing, Chief? This Brother Jay, director over here at the Community Matters Show.
Brother Jay, good morning.
I appreciate you, and I appreciate you staying steadfast. That's coming as a voting citizen. I do appreciate law enforcement when they are truthful and honest and meet the public directly on issues, and you have always done that. Now, two things I want to get. I'm going to try to keep it brief because this is Brother Watson Keith's show. As you might not know, the United States Department of Justice is holding a town hall meeting, which will focus primarily on the Louisiana State Police. We've been participating as activists in the community. One of the things, how important, taking off your law enforcement hat, but as a citizen, how important is for the citizens to get out and give their testimony, because they want to hear testimony from the people, the Department of Justice, about their experiences with the Louisiana State Police, and more than likely the experience with local law enforcement. They're trying to do somewhat of a journal of things from around the state. All the United States attorneys in the state of Louisiana are participating in that whole situation. That's I would like your opinion on that. And secondly, and the question is, when we talked in the past, you talked about in my inquiry, asking you about implementing different types of ways of mitigating crime or investigation of crime, such as the shot sound system when like major city employees, like if a shot go off, you know where the shot, you could map it. For instance, recently in this area, South Louisiana, Lafayette area, they experienced a lot of shootings involving teenagers and those guns. Having law enforcement have the right tools to start investigating it, to get those shooters off the street, is very important to the community. So I know it's a lot. If you briefly could give me, if you feel like giving an answer on either one of those
yes,
questions.
I will address all of them as quickly
Before,
as I can. Number one,
go ahead.
It's very important for the citizens of Lafayette to let the United States Department of Justice know about the way the Lafayette PD operates. They have to, of course, I grew up in Louisiana, in North Louisiana, which is Troop F for the Louisiana State Police. This is where Mr. Green was beaten to death by the Louisiana State Police. And all the times that I was growing up as a small kid, even my 42 years plus in law enforcement, you hear things about the Louisiana State Police. And it's come to pass, and it's very sad that a man had to lose his life in order for an outside review to take place. I pray to God that that doesn't happen in Lafayette. Lafayette, and I'll use this word lightly, has the potential to be a powder keg in law enforcement. And it's because of those small group of bad officers that I tell you about.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to name a few, but I won't do it in the interest of the legal ramifications that it will have. I'm still looking into some of it, but it's very important. I plead with the citizens of Lafayette to tell your information to the Justice Department about how the Lafayette PD, other law enforcement officers and departments in the area, the state police, anybody who's doing things that are wrong in the way of law enforcement, let the Justice Department know. That's very important. The second question, the crime in Lafayette, when I was there, I was blamed for. That was one of the reasons that they came up with about 5 months after I left. Of course, when I was fired, I was erroneously and illegally fired for no reason. After I challenged it, they started to come up with reasons, and one of the reasons they say the crime was up. I asked people, you can verify this on research. The year before I became chief, the crime rate in Lafayette increased by 47%. Nothing happened to that chief. While I was there, of course, I spoke to you. I started looking into technology to fight crime. I had a very comprehensive crime prevention plan that I put together. It did include the instrument that you talked about called Shot Spotter. And what ShotSmarter does, if a shot is fired in the neighborhood, it uses sound patterns and electronic wavelengths and things like that to send signals. And the police department would get notice of it within a matter of seconds. And it'll pinpoint it almost to the point. If it happened on the corner of, Jefferson and Evangeline, officers would be there in a second. Very costly. It costs a couple of $100,000 to outfit the entire city of Lafayette, but it was one of the things I looked into. One of the other things that I did, and this is very important to me, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about it, that was a list created of the top 10 most wanted criminals in Lafayette. These were the people that were doing the shooting, the drug dealing, the beating, the aggravated assaults, the aggravated batteries. Within a matter of weeks, we caught all 10 of them. And in addition to those 10, we added 3 more to it, and we caught the top 13 most wanted and most violent criminals in Lafayette. We got them off the street. So it's very important for citizens to be engaged. That was the thing that was my strength. I believed in the community. And people don't understand a lot of times that the police department is going to operate the way citizens demand that it operates. If you stay quiet, if you don't say anything, they will never get out of the car. They won't get into the community. They won't do the things that community policing and 21st century policing calls for. So citizens make those demands and continue to be vigilant and explain to people, particularly the federal government, the Justice Department, anything that's being done wrong in the way of policing in the Lafayette area. They need to know, and that was one of the things that I took very seriously. This officer who received his job back last week, it was last Wednesday, 9 days ago. A lot of people don't realize it, and perhaps why they didn't want me to testify. I did have a conversation with the feds regarding looking into his case. This is while I was chief of police there in Lafayette. I never made it known. It's something that I didn't think needed to get out. But the incident that he was involved in got the attention of the United States Department of Justice, i.e. the FBI. And I had a discussion that I didn't implement. It was brought up by federal officials to me after I terminated the individual and the victim filed criminal charges on him. The federal government decided that they would let it go and that was sufficient. But I think it's very important to clean any department, law enforcement particularly, to clean it up, because 98% of the officers are good and 2% of the officers are bad. And you can wind up having some very tragic incidents happen when the good officers are being blackballed along with those bad ones who are out there on the street violating people's rights.
Keith got a question.
Before I ask the question, I also want to point out that the civil service, the police, fire, and civil service board we're talking about is not a diverse board. Every member that sits on the board, it was once diverse, but every member that sits on the board is a Caucasian. Is Caucasian. We had they had a African American appointed to the board who then had to resign because of his work in the public field. So this board we talking about is not a diverse board. Every member of the Lafayette Fire and Police Civil Service Board is white. Every person, everyone that serves on the board is white. Now, Chief, do the police union have a heavy influence into how the police department is ran?
Yes, the police union is probably the most influential group in the city of Lafayette. And at times there were instances where I made decisions that was good for the citizens, good for the city of Lafayette, good for Lafayette police officers, period. And if a member of the police union or a member of that board, particularly the elected board, didn't like it, I would get challenged on it. 42 days, I'll give you a good example. 42 days after I took office, February 22nd, was when I terminated this officer for punching a suspect in the stomach inside the jail who was handcuffed. Within 24 hours of me terminating that officer, the union drafted a letter wanting me to be terminated, wanting me to be fired, and they made some very serious claims that existed before I got there. They talked about morale, they talked about instances where officers were chilled, and that's the word they used, chilled, and didn't know how far they could go to do their job. So the union is very influential. And might I add, your current chief of police is the choice of the police union. I know that for a fact, and I can back it up even if I was asked in a public forum. That's who they backed, and that's who got the job. There were two other candidates that were finalists, but the union made a recommendation, very strong recommendation, and it was followed. And there were people in the community that knew this was going to happen weeks, maybe even a month or so before it took place. So that union is very powerful. They file lawsuits, they back officers legally with an attorney who challenges every single disciplinary action that a police chief does. They challenge it, and the word they use, the catch-all phrase at the union attorney, is that the officer wasn't fired in good faith. The Civil Service Board does need to represent the population that's present in the city of Lafayette. They need to represent that, and they didn't when I was there. And I find it quite distressing, I guess you would call them, I use a word, incestuous ties that board has to the police and fire department. Of course, by law, one of the members of the board is elected from the police department, one is elected from the fire department, and your other three are appointed. What's interesting is, at the time I was there, you had a police sergeant, you had a member of the fire department who was there, you had a former fire chief who sat on the board, and you had the spouse of a current Lafayette police officer who sat on the board. So I was aware, and it was reported to me at times that ex parte communications was going on. And what I mean by ex parte, they're not legal. It means that it's a one party where a member of the board may have a discussion with a party involved in an action where they would actually speak to that person and not have the other side present. For example, and I'm not saying this happened, for example, an officer gets terminated, and when that officer gets terminated, someone close to the officer, a member of the officers in a circle or whatever, might have a conversation with a member of the board, and that's looked upon as not being, correct. It's not right. And I got conversations all the time about that. I actually terminated someone, and an officer told me that he disagreed with the termination, and he vehemently disagreed with it profoundly. Didn't think I should have fired the guy. And I had some very serious concerns about it because that officer had a spouse who served on the Civil Service Board. I don't know how that spouse voted on the issues that came in front of the board, but I can tell you that was very troubling to me to have a subordinate of mine to make a statement to me about how he felt, and then I could probably correctly assume that those statements were made at home, and it could potentially influence the way a person votes. So that board is one thing that needs to be straightened out. I know for a fact they put people back to work who were terminated who cannot potentially or legally testify in court. And if you're a police officer and you can't testify in court, it's called the Brady process, the Brady rule. That's where an officer is barred from testimony and the actions are commenced by the district attorney's office. The district attorney should maintain a list called the Brady list. This list would mean that these officers have been proven to commit untruthful statements, maybe things that they weren't true about, and defense attorneys get that information, they use it. So they'll go into court, and if this officer's involved in testimony, they'll say something like, Your Honor, I'd like to have a hearing immediately on the Brady process or the Brady rule. And in 90+% of these cases around the country, the judges ruled in favor of the defense, saying this officer has no credibility. You got that going on in Lafayette where an officer is disciplined, terminated, or whatever for being untruthful and get their job back. And they're back on the street in full uniform. So there's some things that are going on in Lafayette that need to be brought to the public, and other departments around the country corrected these things 25 and 30 years ago. And so that's why I'm concerned that they can operate in a vacuum, in a little seal, where the outside is kept out and it's just an inner circle. And so, that's very important. That's why citizens must stay engaged. They have to.
Yes, sir. Chief, what I couldn't understand, and I'm still trying to understand it now, Wingirder, I think that's her name, Wingirder, dismissed you, but she didn't hire you.
Before we
Josh Gary did that.
Before we get too far into that, I wanna make sure that
when I was terminated, but he didn't say anything to me. He sat there and she did all the talking, and I responded to her. And the only thing he said at the end of the 3-minute ordeal was he reached his right hand out to me after standing up, and he said, "Good luck to you." And I politely responded, and I said, "Thank you for the opportunity." And that was it. People don't realize the sacrifice that I went through.
Yes.
Correct. Had I not already made my living, I would have been in deep trouble. But I'd already made a living. I had almost a 40-year career. My wife and I both were retired. Kids are grown and out of college, and I wasn't hurting or in need of anything. And so what they did to me hurt me financially in the sense that I spent tens of thousands of dollars moving to Lafayette on housing, furniture, things like that. And that was very costly. Then I had to move permanently. I moved out of Lafayette permanently, but I still maintained off and on a place where I stay at here and there. So I'm still connected to the Lafayette citizens more than they know, and I won't get into that, but I'm in Lafayette often, and most of the time people don't even know it. I'm there, and then I'll bide my time, and I'll come back here. But I do love the city. I regret that I was not allowed to take the Lafayette Police Department, which I said is a good department, but I wanted to take it from good to great. I wanted to make it a great department. And I had about 350 employees, about 300 sworn police officers, and about 50 civilian support staff. And I can tell you of the 300, I believe 265, 70 were great officers. You probably had 15, 20, 25, maybe 30 that created the issues that you see on the street. And there are 2 or 3 that I can name. I was about to put one into what we call the early warning system because his name popped up so much on allegations of misconduct or improper use of force or whatever. So I can tell you this, he did hire me. He shook my hand and told me he had my back, and I believed him. And so I committed along with my wife, and we moved to Lafayette, and it lasted 10 months. It took it very costly financially.
Yes.
And while we while we talking about it, that's why I expressed the fact that the home rule charter, if the government, if the government, if the legislative body is not going to go through the process of going through the home rule charter and looking at what needs to be fixed in home rule charter, well, that's where the citizens come in and petition for it to be looked at and fixed. Because the home rule charter states that the mayor president can appoint, he can only appoint, but he can get any employee in LCG to say, hey, fire this guy. And he fired.
Yeah.
You know, that's in the charter. The charter has to be looked at. I mean, the chief of police position has to go from appointed to elected.
Yeah. You know what, Chief? I sit on that committee to get you hired here, you know. And the question I had, not just for you, but for all the 4 members that was running for that seat, you know, what would you do to keep diversity in the police department and accreditation? And you was the only one that gave the best answer. You was the only one, you know. So this is why, you know, I believe in what you was doing. I heard a lot of good things within the inside of the department, how well you was doing. You know, in other words, the police department wasn't walking on pins and needles while you was there.
Correct. And I also want to point out one more thing. There's a lot of outside influence outside of the city of Lafayette that that has input or has a say in how the city of Lafayette is ran. I know one thing. The mayor once said that the chief of police have to have a working relationship with the sheriff, no matter what happens. No matter if the sheriff say, "I want to take over your department," the chief has to do that. Has to let the sheriff do that. That's, you know, I heard the mayor president say that. We know that's why one of the previous chiefs was forced to resign because he didn't want to align with the sheriff. You know, so
You mean on political views or something like that?
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Well, I worked very, very good with Sheriff Garber. Of course, Sheriff Garber is a modern, progressive, capable sheriff.
Correct.
There were people inside the police department who did not like it. I would have meetings often with members of the police department, and they didn't like the fact that I worked closely with the sheriff. In fact, that was one of the things that I came under attack for. But I felt it was my duty to do so, as long as we both were on the same page, and we were. He was part of the task force of violent crime that we created, and as long as the police department is doing what they're supposed to do, as long as they're following the laws, as long as they're doing what the statutes and the courts all the way up to the Supreme Court have allowed them to do, there shouldn't be any reason as to why a sheriff's department for a parish in Louisiana should come in and take over an operation. If the police department is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, if the police department is incapable of following the rules and guidelines, if they're out there abusing citizens and creating misconduct and not solving crime, not preventing crime, and not training their officers and not holding officers accountable, then of course it's relevant. And Sheriff Garber is a sheriff who understands that. He started in law enforcement. I know he worked in law enforcement at one time in the city, in the area where I live at.
Yeah.
And in Texas, we do it a little differently. Of course, we have counties, but in Texas, police departments are predominantly responsible for the city jurisdictions. what Empowered at in the sheriff's department normally handles unincorporated areas, areas that don't have their own law enforcement body, and they take care of the courts and the correctional facilities. But Sheriff Garver is educated, he's well known in his area, and I had no problem working with him. And again, though, I think that's one of the things that's overplayed a lot in Lafayette Parish. I would hear it all the time. The sheriff is going to take over what you're doing. I would always say, well, no, that's not correct. Well, why? I say, because the police department is doing it right. Why would the sheriff have to come over and take over something if the police department is doing it right? So I believe in those collective team efforts. I started a task force to fight violent crime that included the Lafayette Sheriff Department, the City Marshal's Office, the Lafayette University Police, State Police, the FBI, the ATF, as well as Louisiana Probation and Parole and Juvenile Probation and Parole. There was 11 members, and we were put together and conceived in an effort to fight the crime, and it worked. You know, during my tenure there, property crime was down double digits. Violent crime did spike from late May, early June of 2021 to mid-August. But after that, it started to trend down. And when I left, I was terminated on October 7th. On October 13th, on a radio talk show that included the chief who took over after I left, as well as the mayor, it was acknowledged that the crime was going down. But it never was an issue while I was there. But once I was terminated and justification was needed months later, that was brought up, and I think it was improper. I was treated differently because I told you the crime rate before I got there, the year that I got there was 2021. The year before, it increased by 47%. And Lafayette's crime is still high. I have been gone 15 months. 3 chiefs ranging in tenure from about 2 to 3 weeks up to almost to 2 months to a year, and the crime is still high, and it has not been used as a mechanism to terminate or to end the tenure of any of those chiefs. So in that aspect, I think I was treated differently. I want the citizens to look at that, look at the crime that occurred before I got there, and look at the crime that occurred since I've been gone, and see if I was treated different, if there was any justification for them using the crime rate months after I was gone as a mechanism to say, well, the crime was up. You know, at the time I was there, I was doing very proactive things, and I can tell you I'm a very good note taker. I have some, mental notes, I have written notes, and I have proof of the things I'm saying. It was communicated to me officially on some things about how they're working, good idea, great job, those type things. I have 75 text messages from my bosses while I was a chief that went on from January through October 2021. Of those 75 text messages, 60 came from Josh Guillory, and 15, I believe, came from Sidra Wingert. And only 2 of those, I believe 2 or 3, might have had a negative comment on it. On one of them, the mayor expressed frustration with the panhandlers and things like that. And the other one, we'd had a shooting near St. Anthony Park, and he, on a Sunday evening, a Sunday night, texted me how unhappy he was with how things were. But the other 70 plus, 5.5 dozen, were positive. You're the best chief. Great job. Good leader. You're changing the culture. I think you're on to something here. I'm proud to serve with you. Those kind of things. So it was a shock to me after I'd been hearing for 10 months the great job I was doing and how the mayor liked what I was doing. He was especially fond of the community work. I went to all sides of Lafayette, north side, south side. I met with the ministerial alliances. I met with the Republican women of Acadiana. I went to locations that were diverse. I went to churches that were 99% one race. And so I didn't look at race or color. The members of the police department who were out to get me, and believe me, there was some. They watched everything I did, even the way I parked my vehicle, and complained about me parking head in instead of backing in. So these are the people who precipitated this process and brought race into it. And I did not bring race into it, but they did. And I'm sorry to say that I believe the decision to terminate me was bad. It was poorly made, and I'm going to do whatever I can to, get some redress.
Chief, with the practices that we've seen and the movements that we've seen with the Civil Service Board, with the Police and Fire Civil Service Board, as they're giving officers who've committed excessive force violations and giving them their jobs back. Do you think that's putting the safety and well-being of the citizens at risk?
Yes, sir. And it goes back to what I mentioned to you earlier about vicarious liability. Vicarious liability means that the people in charge are responsible for what the subordinates do. There's also a process in policing and in employment period called negligent training, negligent retention. The negligent training would go in, if it was true, which it is not, but if it was true that the Lafayette Police Department was training officers to punch handcuffed prisoners in the stomach, like the testimony that was given to the grand jury and to the DA's office and to the Civil Service Board, if that was true, the Lafayette Police Department is heavy in the liability for negligent training. Mm-hmm. You teach an officer, you train an officer to do what is legal, and it's not legal to punch a handcuffed prisoner. And I used to kind of jokingly say, even though I was serious, I said, if you had Bruce Lee or Steven Seagal or Michael Jai White or people like that who could kill you, do things to you, then you could strike a handcuffed prisoner only if it's justifiable what they were trying to hurt you at. In this instance in the jail, that guy was standing up. Of course, he refused to sit down several times after the officer instructed him. Here's the key to that. Under the use of force guidelines, and this is very important for the citizens to know, under the use of force guidelines, when you're in a locked jail, in a locked facility, you can't use force on a person.
Okay, let me
refuse your verbal commands. And that case is the one that I was going to testify about in front of the board too. It's the Kingsley versus Wisconsin. I think it came about in 2015, where an inmate in a jail posted some paper all over his light fixture so it could be dim in his cell, and they kept instructing him to take it down, and he wouldn't do it, and so they went in with force. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court specifically said you can't do that. It's a violation of the 8th Amendment, and it's a violation of the 14th Amendment. Due process, you can't go in there. And so maintaining employment or re-employing someone who's been terminated for improper use of force that's
Chief,
not justifiable is a very, very shaky decision.
Chief, look, we appreciate you being on the phone with us this morning. We got 1 minute before we sign off. And okay. I'm going to sure try to get you on at another date. But I appreciate you. And look, you have a blessed day, a blessed weekend, and a happy new year.
Thank you so much, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. And if I may, I just want to say hello to all the citizens of Lafayette, to people who supported me. I love you. I'm still up back and forth. If you see me out, speak at me, holler at me, do whatever. But I'm asking everybody to pray for me. And I am praying for the city of Lafayette that they can get through the things that need to be changed in the police department without anyone getting hurt or without any officer getting hurt. Those are my biggest fear. I don't want anybody to be harmed. I love the citizens. I love the police officers there. And good luck to you, and have a great and wonderful 2023.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you.
Y'all heard it from the chief, the former chief of police here, you know, and he was a very good police officer.
Thank y'all for letting us come into your hearts, your eyes, your homes. We thank y'all for tuning in today. We know someone was trying to call in, but next Friday, same station, same phone number. We gonna
Same
be here,
time.
same time. We gonna be addressing it. Before we go, remember January 24th, which is this coming Thursday or Tuesday. This coming Tuesday. The United States Department of Justice is going to be in Lafayette. They're going to have a town hall at the Downtown Convention Center, which is located at 124 South Buchanan Street here in Lafayette. And it's going to start at 7 p.m. If you had any problems or any issues with law enforcement in the Acadiana region, come out and address your concerns.
There was an old woman who